Barry Gibb had always loved this time of day in Miami, when the heat softened and the city exhaled after holding its breath through another scorching summer afternoon. He'd slipped out of his home studio around 4 o'clock, needing air, needing distance from the half-finished melody that had been circling his mind for weeks. At 77, Barry had learned to recognize when pushing harder meant pushing the music further away. Sometimes the best thing a songwriter could do was walk. His route took him through the quiet residential streets he'd known for decades, past towering royal palms and meticulous hedges, past homes where families were beginning their evening routines. The neighborhood had changed over the years, new faces, different cars, but the essential character remained. This was a place where people came to build lives, to find peace, to grow old with grace. He was 3 blocks from home when he heard it. A woman's voice, thin but true, carrying across a front yard thick with bougainvillea and jasmine. She was singing, "How Deep Is Your Love?" and something about her rendition made Barry stop mid-stride on the sidewalk. It wasn't her technique. The voice wavered, cracked slightly on the higher notes. It was the emotion. She sang like someone remembering, like each word was a photograph she was holding up to the light. Barry moved closer, drawn by something he couldn't name. Through the ornate iron gate he could see her, a woman in her 80s, seated in a weathered wicker chair beside a small fountain. Her silver hair was pulled back in a loose bun, and she wore a floral house dress that had probably been bright once but had faded to soft pastels through countless washings. Her eyes were closed as she sang, one hand resting on the arm of the chair, fingers moving slightly as if conducting an invisible orchestra. The garden around her was clearly loved. Roses bloomed in carefully tended beds. Herbs grew in terracotta pots, and a small orange tree heavy with fruit stood in one corner. Wind chimes hung from the porch, their gentle percussion providing an accidental accompaniment. "I believe in you," she sang, her voice catching. "You know the door to my very soul." Barry felt something tighten in his chest. He'd heard his songs performed thousands of times, in concert halls, on radio, in elevators and shopping malls. He'd heard them sung by professionals and amateurs, by children and adults, in dozens of languages. But this was different. This woman wasn't performing. She was praying. He stood there for a long moment, unsure whether to interrupt or simply move on. The setting sun caught the edge of the fountain, making the water sparkle. A neighbor's dog barked somewhere in the distance. The world continued its ordinary business, while this woman sat in her garden, singing a song from 1977, like it was written yesterday. Then, as if sensing his presence, she opened her eyes. For a moment, they simply looked at each other through the iron scrollwork of the gate. Her expression showed no recognition, just mild surprise that someone was standing there, listening. She didn't stop singing, but her voice grew quieter, more uncertain. Barry did something he rarely did these days. He smiled, raised a hand in a small wave, and very softly joined her on the chorus. "How deep is your love? How deep is your love?" His voice, still strong despite the years, still carrying that distinctive vibration that had defined an era, blended with hers. The woman's eyes widened, but she kept singing, her voice growing stronger now, more confident. She recognized the voice before she recognized the face. When the chorus ended, they both stopped. Silence filled the garden except for the wind chimes and the gentle splash of the fountain. "I know you," she said finally, her hand rising to her throat. "I know that voice." Barry opened the gate, it wasn't locked, and stepped into the garden. Up close, he could see the lines on her face, each one a story. Her hands, resting now in her lap, were spotted with age, the knuckles swollen with arthritis. "I'm Barry," he said simply. "I was just walking by and I heard, you have a beautiful way with that song." "Oh my God," she whispered. "Oh my dear God, you're really him. You're really Barry Gibb." "I am," he said gently. "And you are?" "Eleanor," she managed. "Eleanor Hartley. I'm sorry, I must look like a crazy old woman sitting in my garden singing to myself." "You look," Barry interrupted, "like someone who loves music. May I sit?" She gestured to another wicker chair, identical to hers, positioned on the other side of the small table between them. As Barry settled into it, he noticed a glass of iced tea beside her, condensation beating on the outside, and a pair of reading glasses resting on a folded newspaper. "I can't believe you're here," Eleanor said, her hands trembling slightly. "In my garden, This isn't... Am I dreaming? You're not dreaming, Barry assured her. Though I admit this is a bit unusual for both of us. I don't usually wander into strangers' gardens. Eleanor laughed, a bright, genuine sound that seemed to surprise her. And I don't usually have legends show up while I'm murdering their songs. You weren't murdering it, Barry said firmly. Not at all. You were singing it the way it's meant to be sung, with feeling. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, and she quickly wiped at them with the back of her hand. I'm sorry, I'm being ridiculous. It's just, your music has meant so much to me. So much. My husband and I, that was our song. How Deep Is Your Love? We danced to it at our wedding. We danced to it in this very garden on our 50th anniversary. And every time I hear it, I'm 23 again, wearing a white dress, looking into Thomas's eyes and thinking I was the luckiest woman alive. Barry listened, saying nothing, letting her words settle in the air between them. He passed 2 years ago. Eleanor continued, her voice steadier now. Pancreatic cancer. 6 months from diagnosis to, well, it was very fast. And every evening when the house gets too quiet, I come out here and I sing. All the old songs. The ones that make me remember what it felt like to be young and in love and certain that nothing could ever go wrong. I'm sorry for your loss, Barry said, and he meant it. He knew about loss. He'd buried brothers, bandmates, friends. He understood the particular silence that grief created. He loved the Bee Gees, Eleanor said, managing a smile. All our friends were into the Beatles and the Stones, but Thomas, he said your voices sounded like angels. He said when you three sang together, it was like hearing heaven. Barry felt his own eyes prickle. Maurice and Robin, gone too soon, both of them. The harmonies that had defined his life, silenced. We were just brothers who loved to sing, he said quietly. We never imagined it would touch people's lives the way it has. But it did, Eleanor said. It does. Every day it does. Your music got me through losing my mother. It got Thomas through losing his job in the recession. It was playing when both our daughters were born. It's woven into every important moment of my life. They sat in silence for a moment, the significance of what she was saying hanging in the air. This was why he'd written songs, Barry thought. Not for the charts or the awards or the accolades, though those had been wonderful, but for this, for people like Eleanor, who carried his melodies through their lives like talismans against the darkness. Would you sing it again? Barry asked. The song, with me this time? Eleanor's hand went to her throat again. You want to sing with me? But I don't have a good voice anymore. Age and tears have ruined it. Your voice is perfect, Barry said, because it's honest. And I'd consider it an honor. Eleanor looked at him for a long moment, searching his face for any sign that he was merely being polite. She found only sincerity. All right, she said finally. Yes, I'd like that very much. As the sun continued its descent toward the horizon, painting the Miami sky in shades of pink and purple, Barry Gibb and Eleanor Hartley began to sing together in a small garden in Coral Gables. Their voices, one legendary, one ordinary, wove together like threads in a tapestry, creating something that neither could have made alone. And for the first time in 2 years, Eleanor felt her husband's presence beside her, as real as the flowers and the fountain and the fading light. Chapter 2. Stories Between the Notes. When the song ended, Eleanor was crying openly, but she was also smiling, a complicated expression that Barry recognized. Joy and sorrow living in the same moment, neither diminishing the other. Thank you, she said, reaching across the small table to touch his hand. Her fingers were cool, delicate. Thank you for that gift, for this impossible, beautiful moment. The pleasure was entirely mine, Barry said, and meant it. Something about this encounter felt important in a way he couldn't quite articulate. You know, if you don't have plans, I'd love to stay and talk for a bit, if you're comfortable with that. Eleanor laughed. Comfortable? Barry Gibb wants to stay in my garden and talk. I think I can manage that, yes. She stood, moving carefully, arthritis in the knees, Barry guessed, and said, let me get us some proper refreshment. I have lemonade, or I could make tea, or something stronger if you'd like. Thomas always kept a bottle of bourbon for special occasions, and I can't imagine a more special occasion than this. Lemonade sounds perfect, Barry said. Eleanor disappeared into the house through a screen door that squeaked on its hinges. Barry remained in the garden, taking in the details he'd missed before. A small stone bird bath, slightly cracked. A collection of ceramic planters painted with bright flowers. A wooden bench under the orange tree with a worn cushion. Everything spoke of care, of attention, of a life built slowly and intentionally. The house itself was modest, a single-story ranch-style home probably built in the 1960s, painted a soft yellow with white trim. Through the screen door, Barry could see into a kitchen with vintage appliances and wallpaper that featured tiny roosters. It reminded him of his own early homes, before the mansions and the studios, when life was simpler and success was still a dream. Eleanor returned with 2 tall glasses of lemonade, ice cubes clinking against the sides. She'd also brought a plate of cookies, homemade by the look of them. "Oatmeal raisin," she said, setting them down. "I bake every Sunday. It's a habit I can't break, even though there's just me now. I usually give most of them to the mailman and the neighbor kids, but I think you qualify for 1 or 2. They settled back into their chairs, and for a moment simply enjoyed the lemonade, tart and sweet in perfect balance, and the peaceful atmosphere of the garden. "This is a beautiful space," Barry said. "You can tell it's been loved." "Thomas and I planted this garden the year we moved in," Eleanor said. 1969. The neighborhood was much younger then, full of families with children. Now most of us are old, and the children have grandchildren of their own. She gestured to the orange tree. "That tree was a sapling when we planted it. Now look at it. Outlived its gardener, but still bearing fruit," Barry observed. "That means something." Eleanor looked at him thoughtfully. "You're very kind. Not what I expected, I suppose. Though I'm not sure what I expected. You read things about famous people and you assume, well, I don't know what you assume. That we're different?" Barry suggested. "That fame makes you something other than human?" "Something like that," Eleanor admitted. "But here you are, drinking lemonade in a stranger's garden, being perfectly lovely about the whole thing." Barry smiled. "Here's the secret they don't tell you about fame. It's just a thing that happened. It doesn't change who you are inside. I'm still the kid from the Isle of Man who loved to sing with his brothers. Still the same person who gets nervous before performances and forgets where he put his keys and worries about whether the songs are any good." "The songs are always good," Eleanor said firmly. "Every single one. Do you know I have every album you ever made? Every single one, from the Bee Gees' Sing and Play 14 Barry Gibb songs all the way to your solo work. They're in the house, on a shelf Thomas built special. He was so proud of that shelf." "He sounds like he was a wonderful man," Barry said. Eleanor's expression softened. "He was. Not perfect, no one is, but wonderful in the ways that matter. He was an accountant, if you can believe it. Numbers and spreadsheets all day. But at home he was different. He'd put on your records and dance with me in the kitchen while dinner was cooking. He'd make up silly lyrics to make me laugh. He had this terrible singing voice, completely tone deaf, but it didn't matter because he sang with his whole heart. Those are the best singers," Barry said. "The ones who don't worry about hitting the notes perfectly. They worry about meaning every word." "Yes," Eleanor said. "Exactly yes. That was Thomas." A small green parrot, a wild one common in Miami, landed on the bird bath and began splashing enthusiastically. They watched it for a moment, both smiling at its obvious joy. "Can I ask you something?" Eleanor said after the parrot had flown away. "About the music?" "Of course. When you write a song like, 'How Deep Is Your Love,' do you know it's going to matter to people? That it's going to become the soundtrack to their lives?" Barry considered this carefully. "Not when you're writing it, no. In the moment, you're just trying to capture a feeling, to find the right words for something that's hard to put into words. That song, we wrote it for Saturday Night Fever, but it came from a real place. From thinking about love and commitment and the question everyone asks themselves, how much do I really matter to this person? And how deep is your love?" Eleanor asked softly. "As deep as the ocean," Barry said. "When it's real, it's bottomless. You'd do anything, give anything, be anything for the other person, and they'd do the same for you. That's what we were trying to capture." Eleanor nodded. "You did. You really did. When Thomas was dying, in those last weeks when the pain was so bad, I'd lie next to him in the hospital bed and sing that song. I'd hold his hand and sing, and even when he couldn't talk anymore, I'd see his fingers move slightly, keeping time. The nurses said music was important, that it reached parts of the brain that nothing else could. Your song helped him find peace. Barry had to look away for a moment, overcome. This is what music did, he thought. This is the real magic. Not gold records or sold-out stadiums, but this. Being there when words fail, when medicine can't help, when all you have left is a melody and hope. I'm glad, he said, his voice rough. I'm so glad it could do that for you both. They talked for another hour as the sun set and the garden lights came on. Small, solar-powered lanterns that Eleanor had placed among the flowers. She told him about her daughters, Patricia, who lived in Boston and worked as a pediatrician, and Susan, who taught high school English in Seattle. She showed him pictures on her phone, grandchildren and great-grandchildren, birthday parties and graduations, the accumulation of a well-lived life. Barry told her about his own children, about the challenges of balancing creativity with family, about the guilt that came with being on the road so much. He spoke about his brothers with a tenderness that surprised him, how he still heard Maurice's laugh sometimes, how he'd see something funny and think, I have to tell Robin about this, before remembering that he couldn't. Grief is strange, Eleanor said. It doesn't get smaller. You just get bigger around it. You grow a bigger life, a bigger heart, and the grief stays the same size, but there's more of you to carry it. That's beautiful, Barry said. Is that from something? Just from living, Eleanor said. From surviving when you weren't sure you could. As the evening deepened into night, bringing the chorus of crickets and the distant sound of traffic, Barry realized he didn't want to leave. There was something healing about this garden, this conversation, this unexpected connection with a stranger who somehow didn't feel like a stranger at all. Eleanor, he said, would you mind if I came back sometime? To visit, I mean. Just to sit and talk like this. Eleanor's eyes widened. You want to come back? Here. Very much, Barry said, if that's all right with you. All right. Eleanor's laugh was incredulous. It would be, yes. Yes, please come back anytime. I'm always here. I don't go anywhere much these days. Then I'll come, Barry promised. Soon, when he finally stood to leave, Eleanor walked him to the gate. The street was quiet now, the neighbors' houses lit from within, families settling in for the night. Thank you, Eleanor said, for stopping, for listening, for singing with me. This was, I don't have words for what this was. Neither do I, Barry said, but I'm grateful for it. He walked home through the darkened streets, his mind full of the evening's unexpected gift. Somewhere in the distance he could hear music playing, one of his songs, maybe, or someone else's. It didn't matter. What mattered was the connection music created, the way it built bridges between strangers and kept the dead alive in memory. When he reached his house, he went straight to his studio. The half-finished melody that had been troubling him earlier was suddenly clear. He picked up his guitar and began to play, thinking of Eleanor and Thomas, of love that outlasted death, of gardens where memories bloomed like roses. The song wrote itself in an hour. Chapter 3. The garden becomes a habit. 3 days later, Barry found himself walking past Eleanor's house again. He hadn't planned it, or so he told himself, but his afternoon walk had somehow taken him in that direction, and there was her garden, bright with morning glories and the splash of the fountain. Eleanor was there, as if she'd been waiting. She was deadheading roses, moving slowly along the bed with a small pair of pruning shears. Hello, Barry called from the gate. She turned, and her face lit up with a smile so genuine it made him grateful he'd come. Barry, oh, I hoped you'd come back. I wasn't sure if you really meant it or if you were just being polite. I meant it, he said, letting himself into the garden. How have you been? Better, she said, and he could tell she meant it. There was a lightness to her that hadn't been there before. I told my daughters about your visit. They thought I was losing my mind. Patricia actually called Susan and they had a whole conversation about whether I needed a cognitive evaluation. Then I sent them the photo. Photo? Barry asked. Eleanor pulled out her phone, navigating to the photos with the careful deliberation of someone who hadn't grown up with the technology. She showed him a selfie she'd apparently asked a neighbor to take through the window while they were talking. It was slightly blurry, but there they were, an elderly woman and a legendary musician sitting in a garden, smiling like old friends. Mrs. Chen from next door took it, Eleanor explained. She was so excited she could barely hold the phone steady.
She's already told everyone at her church that Barry Gibb is a regular visitor to the neighborhood. Barry laughed. I hope I didn't cause you any trouble. Trouble? I'm the most popular person on the block. The mailman actually stopped to ask if the rumors were true. I've lived here for 55 years, and I've never been so interesting. They settled into what would become their usual spots, the two wicker chairs flanking the small table. Today Eleanor had made iced coffee, and she'd put out a plate of what she called snickerdoodles, though Barry knew them better as cinnamon biscuits. I've been thinking, Eleanor said, about what we talked about last time, about your brothers, about grief. And I wanted to ask, if it's not too painful, what it's like for you now. Without them, I mean. Does it get easier? It was a question most people were afraid to ask, but Eleanor had earned the right. No, Barry said honestly. It doesn't get easier, but it does change. At first, their absence was all I could feel. Every song I heard, every memory, every quiet moment was just empty. Maurice's laugh was gone. Robin's harmonies were gone. The three voices that had been one voice, that was gone. He paused, gathering his thoughts. But over time, I started to feel them differently. Not as an absence, but as a presence. They're in every chord I play, every lyric I write. We spent so many years creating together that they're woven into how I think about music. I'll be working on something, and I'll hear Maurice's voice in my head saying, "No, mate, try it this way." Or I'll know exactly what Robin would have done with a particular phrase. Eleanor nodded, understanding in her eyes. Thomas is like that in my garden. I can't plant a seed without thinking about his hands in the soil beside mine. Sometimes I catch myself turning to point out a bird or a bloom, expecting him to be there, and for just a second he is. Exactly, Barry said. They're not gone. They're just different, present in a different way. They talked about loss for a while, not in a sad way, but in the way of people who understood it deeply and didn't need to shy away from it. Eleanor told him about the first year after Thomas died, how she'd kept setting 2 plates at dinner by habit, how she'd still catch herself wanting to tell him about her day before remembering she couldn't. The cruelest part, she said, was the small moments, not the anniversaries or holidays, those you expect to be hard. It was finding his reading glasses and remembering he'd never need them again. It was hearing a joke he would have loved and having no one to tell. It was waking up in the morning and, for just a second, forgetting he was gone. I still do that with Maurice and Robin, Barry admitted. I'll think I should call Robin about this before I remember. It's been years, and I still do that. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Eleanor asked, "Do you ever wonder what they'd think of your solo work?" "Your brothers?" "Every day," Barry said. "I hope they'd be proud. I hope they'd understand that I'm not trying to replace what we had, but to honor it. To keep the music going because that's what we did. We made music. They'd be proud," Eleanor said with certainty. "How could they not be? You're still creating, still giving people joy and comfort. That's what matters." Over the next few weeks, Barry's visits became regular. Sometimes he'd come in the afternoon, sometimes early evening. They fell into an easy rhythm, talking about music, about life, about the small observations that people usually keep to themselves. Eleanor introduced him to her neighbors, most of whom were elderly themselves and had lived on the street for decades. There was Harold from 2 houses down, a retired firefighter who tended an impressive vegetable garden. Maria across the street, originally from Cuba, who made the best pastelitos Barry had ever tasted. The Chen family next door, whose grandmother had recently moved in and spent her days practicing Tai Chi in the backyard. These were people who'd built lives in this neighborhood, who'd raised children and buried spouses and watched the world change around them while their small corner remained constant. They welcomed Barry without fuss, treating him not as a celebrity but as Eleanor's friend, which was exactly what he was becoming. One afternoon, Harold brought over tomatoes from his garden, enormous beefsteaks still warm from the sun. "These are incredible," Barry said, examining one. "Secrets in the soil," Harold explained. "And talking to them. My wife used to say I was crazy, spending all morning talking to plants, but look at the results." "I talk to my roses," Eleanor admitted. "I tell them they're beautiful and encourage them to bloom. Thomas always said I was nuts, but they seem to respond. There's actually science behind that," Maria said. She'd come over with her contribution, fresh pastelitos, still warm. Plants respond to sound vibrations, music, talking. It all affects their growth.
Then I should sing to them more, Barry said, and everyone laughed. But later, when the neighbors had gone and it was just Barry and Eleanor again, he did exactly that. He sang Massachusetts to the roses, words to the orange tree, staying alive to the herbs in their terracotta pots. Eleanor sat in her chair, crying with laughter. "You're completely mad." "Maybe," Barry agreed. "But look, that basil just perked up." These moments of lightness became precious to both of them. Barry realized he laughed more in Eleanor's garden than he had in years. There was no pressure here, no expectations. He wasn't Barry Gibb of the Bee Gees. He was just Barry, an old man sitting in a garden with a friend, making silly jokes and eating cookies. One evening, as the sun set in shades of coral and gold, Eleanor said, "Can I ask you something? About fame?" "Anything. Do you ever regret it?" "The success, I mean. The way it took over your life?" Barry thought about this carefully. "I regret the time it stole from my family. I regret being on the road when I should have been home. I regret that my children had to share me with the world instead of having me to themselves." He paused. "But I don't regret the music. I can't. It's who I am." And it led to moments like this, sitting here with you. If I hadn't written those songs, you wouldn't have been singing in your garden that day, and I wouldn't have stopped to listen. "So you believe things happen for a reason?" Eleanor asked. "I believe people find each other when they need to," Barry said. "I needed this garden, this friendship. I didn't know it, but I did. The world had gotten too big, too complicated. I needed to remember why I started making music in the first place, not for stadiums full of people, but for moments like Thomas dancing with you in the kitchen. For connection, for joy." Eleanor reached across and squeezed his hand. "You've given me something too. You've reminded me that life isn't over just because it looks different than it used to, that there are still beautiful surprises waiting, that gardens still bloom and music still plays and friendships still form." As Barry walked home that night, he thought about transformation, how a chance encounter had become a friendship, how a garden had become a sanctuary, how two people who shouldn't have had anything in common had found common ground in music and loss, and the simple pleasure of conversation. He thought about writing a song about it, but decided some things were better left unwritten. Some moments were meant to be lived, not captured. Some friendships existed outside the realm of melody and lyric, in the sacred space of two people simply being present with each other. Still, when he got home, he found himself at the piano, playing a gentle melody that had Eleanor's garden woven through it. The splash of the fountain, the rustle of palm fronds, the warmth of the Florida sun. It wasn't a song, it was a prayer of gratitude. Sooner, Chapter 4, When the World Finds Out. It started small, a post on social media by Mrs. Chen's granddaughter, who'd captured a photo of Barry and Eleanor sitting in the garden, both of them laughing at something. The caption read, "My grandma's neighbor has afternoon tea with Barry Gibb. Just a regular Tuesday in Coral Gables." Within hours, the post had gone viral. Barry's phone started ringing at 7 a.m. His manager, his publicist, his children, all wanting to know if it was true, if he was really spending his afternoons in some stranger's garden, if he'd lost his mind. "She's not a stranger," Barry said patiently for the 5th time. "She's a friend. And yes, I visit her. What's the problem?" "The problem," his publicist said, "is that you're a public figure. You can't just wander into random people's gardens without security, without preparation, without managing the narrative." "I can," Barry said, "and I will." End of discussion. But it wasn't the end. By noon, there were photographers camped out on Eleanor's street. By evening, news vans had arrived. Eleanor called, her voice shaky. "Barry, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. Mrs. Chen's granddaughter posted something and now there are people everywhere. They're asking me questions through the fence. One of them wanted to know if you were my secret lover. Can you imagine? At my age." Despite the seriousness of the situation, Barry had to laugh. "Are you all right? They're not bothering you too much?" Harold chased some of them away with his garden hose, Eleanor said. It was quite a sight. "But Barry, I don't want to cause you trouble. If this is going to be a problem for you, you don't have to visit anymore." "I understand." "Eleanor," Barry said firmly, "I'm not staying away because some photographers showed up. If anyone should be apologizing, it's me. I should have warned you this might happen." I never thought. I mean, you're you, and I'm just me. Who cares if we're friends? Apparently everyone, Barry said, but it'll die down. Give it a few days and they'll move on to the next story. In the meantime, don't answer any questions. Don't talk to anyone. And if they make you uncomfortable, call the police. The story didn't die down in a few days. Instead, it grew. News outlets picked it up. Barry Gibb's secret garden friendship. Social media exploded with speculation and commentary. Some people thought it was heartwarming. Others were cynical, suggesting it was a publicity stunt. A few were bizarrely angry, as if Barry was somehow betraying his fans by having a private friendship. The Today Show wanted an interview with both of them. Good Morning America sent flowers with a request for exclusive access. A producer from Netflix called about a possible documentary. Barry declined everything. This wasn't a story to be packaged and sold. This was his life, his friendship, his private sanctuary in an increasingly public world. But then the articles started appearing, not just about the friendship, but about Eleanor herself. Some journalist had done research and discovered that she'd been a teacher for 40 years, that she'd volunteered at a homeless shelter for 2 decades, that she'd fostered 12 children over the course of her marriage to Thomas. One article interviewed former students. Mrs. Hartley changed my life, a now successful surgeon said. I was failing out of school, headed nowhere, and she stayed after every day for a month to tutor me. She believed in me when no one else did. Another former foster child, now a social worker herself, wrote a beautiful tribute. Mrs. Hartley opened her home and her heart to broken children. She gave us stability, love, and hope. She taught us that family isn't just blood. It's who shows up, who stays, who loves you when you're hardest to love. Barry read these articles with growing admiration. He'd known Eleanor was special, but he hadn't known the extent of her impact on the world. When he next visited, escorted by security now, much to his annoyance, he found Eleanor in the garden, looking tired. You've been hiding your light under a bushel, he said, kissing her cheek. I've been what? You never told me about all the lives you've changed, the children you fostered, the students you helped. Eleanor waved a hand dismissively. That was just what you do. You see someone who needs help, you help them. Thomas and I couldn't have children of our own, so we loved other people's children. It wasn't heroic, it was practical. It was both, Barry said. Eleanor, do you know what these articles are saying about you? People are calling you a local hero. That's ridiculous, Eleanor said, but she was blushing. I was just a teacher, just a woman who liked kids. Just, Barry repeated. You keep using that word. Just a teacher, just a woman. Eleanor, there's no just about you. You've spent your whole life giving to others. That's not small. That's everything. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of unwanted attention hanging over them. I'm sorry this happened, Eleanor said finally. Your friendship has meant the world to me, but if it's causing you stress or problems, it's not, Barry interrupted. The attention is annoying, but it'll pass. What won't pass is this. He gestured between them. This matters. You matter. And I'm not walking away from something that matters just because it's inconvenient. You're stubborn, Eleanor observed. Comes with the territory, Barry said. You don't make it in music for 50 years without being stubborn. Over the next week, something unexpected happened. The story shifted from mere curiosity to something deeper. People started sharing their own stories about the teachers who'd changed their lives, the neighbors who'd shown kindness, the ordinary people who'd made extraordinary differences in small, consistent ways. A movement emerged on social media. Be More Eleanor. People posted about acts of kindness, about fostering children, about volunteering, about showing up for others. Eleanor's story had touched something universal. The hunger for authentic goodness in a cynical world. Eleanor's daughters flew in from Boston and Seattle, both of them worried about their mother's sudden fame. Barry was at the house when they arrived. Patricia, tall and serious with her mother's eyes, and Susan, softer and more emotional, clearly her father's daughter. Mr. Gibb, Patricia said, her tone professional. Can we speak privately? Of course, Barry said, but Eleanor stood up. Anything you have to say to Barry, you can say in front of me, she said, her voice firm in a way Barry had never heard before. This is my house and he's my friend. Patricia and Susan exchanged glances. Mom, Susan said gently, we're just concerned. This is all so sudden, so overwhelming. We want to make sure you're okay, that you're not being taken advantage of. Taken advantage of? Eleanor's voice rose. Barry has been nothing but kind and respectful. He comes here because he wants to, because we enjoy each other's company. What exactly do you think is happening? We don't know what to think. Patricia admitted. You're our mother. We love you. And suddenly there are photographers outside your house and news articles about you, and we're worried. Barry stood. Perhaps I should go. No, Eleanor said firmly. You should stay. Girls, sit down. We're going to talk about this like adults.
What followed was an honest, sometimes difficult conversation. Patricia and Susan voiced their concerns about their mother's vulnerability, about the possibility of exploitation, about the disruption to her quiet life. Barry listened without defensiveness, understanding their protective instinct. I can't promise that my presence in your mother's life won't occasionally attract attention, he said. That's the unfortunate reality of who I am publicly, but I can promise that my intentions are pure. Your mother's friendship has given me something I didn't know I needed. Connection without agenda, conversation without performance, a space where I can just be myself. If anything, I'm the one benefiting more from this friendship. Eleanor's eyes were wet. Barry's been a blessing. After your father died, I felt so alone. Yes, you girls called and visited when you could, but you have your own lives, your own families. I didn't want to be a burden. Barry reminded me that I'm still here, still alive, still capable of friendship and joy. Susan was crying now too. Oh, Mom, you could never be a burden. But I felt like one, Eleanor said. I felt like my useful life was over, like I was just waiting. And then Barry walked into my garden, and suddenly I wasn't waiting anymore. I was living again. The conversation shifted after that. Patricia and Susan relaxed, began to see what their mother saw. Not a celebrity using her for publicity, but a man who'd found an unexpected friend. By the end of the evening, they were all in the garden together. Barry telling stories about touring that made them laugh, Eleanor sharing memories of Thomas that made them cry. Before they left, Susan hugged Barry. Thank you for being kind to our mom, and for showing up. A lot of people in your position wouldn't have. Your mother is easy to show up for, Barry said simply. After they left, Eleanor and Barry sat in the quiet garden. Thank you, she said, for staying, for explaining, for not being frightened off by my overprotective daughters. They love you, Barry said. That's all that was. And honestly, it's good that you have people watching out for you. Do you have that? Eleanor asked. People watching out for you? Barry thought about his family, his friends, the people in his life. I do, he said, though I could probably do better at letting them. We're similar that way, Eleanor observed. Both of us used to giving, not so comfortable with receiving. Maybe we can teach each other, Barry suggested. Maybe we can, Eleanor agreed. As the media storm continued to swirl around them, Barry and Eleanor made a pact. They wouldn't let the attention change their friendship. They would continue to meet in the garden, to talk and sing, and simply be present with each other. The world could watch, could speculate, could project whatever narratives they wanted. None of it would matter, as long as they stayed true to what they knew was real. Chapter 5. The Garden Concert. It was Harold who suggested it, during one of the informal gatherings that had become common in Eleanor's garden. Maria, Mrs. Chen, a few other neighbors. They'd started dropping by in the evenings when they knew Barry might be there, not to intrude, but to be part of the warm community that had formed around the unlikely friendship. You know what would shut everyone up, Harold said, gesturing with his iced tea. A concert, right here in the garden. Nothing fancy, just Barry playing a few songs for the neighborhood. Show people this is real, that it's not some PR stunt. Oh, I don't think, Eleanor began, but Maria interrupted. No, Harold's right. All these people talking, making up stories. Let them see the truth. Let them see what we see. Two friends sharing music. Barry had been quiet, sitting in his usual chair, listening. Now he spoke. I'd be willing if Eleanor is comfortable with it, but it would have to be small. Intimate, not a spectacle. Everyone turned to Eleanor. She looked overwhelmed. I don't know. My garden isn't exactly Madison Square Garden. That's exactly the point, Barry said gently. This whole friendship started because you were sitting in your garden singing a song. Maybe we close the circle, invite a few people, neighbors, friends,
No press, no cameras, just music. Eleanor looked around her garden, trying to imagine it filled with people. How would we even do this? There's no room for a stage or chairs or... We don't need any of that, Harold said. Barry sits where he always sits. We all gather around. Simple, like a house concert, Susan suggested. She'd stayed in Miami after the initial visit, taking a week off from teaching to spend time with her mother. My school does them sometimes for music class. Very casual, very intimate. I could make food, Maria offered. Pastelitos, croquetas, maybe some arroz con pollo. I'll bring my famous potato salad, Harold added. My daughter-in-law makes these Chinese dumplings that are incredible, Mrs. Chen said. I'll have her make a batch. The plan took shape despite Eleanor's protests. Word spread quietly through the neighborhood. No social media, no public announcements. Just a whisper from neighbor to neighbor. Barry Gibb would play a small concert in Eleanor Hartley's garden on Saturday evening. Bring a chair and a dish to share. The days leading up to it, Barry found himself nervous in a way he hadn't been before a performance in years. He'd played for crowds of thousands without breaking a sweat, but the thought of performing for 20 neighbors in a backyard made his hands shake. It's because it matters, Eleanor told him when he confessed his anxiety. You're not performing for strangers. You're playing for friends. What should I play? Barry asked. What do you want to hear? Eleanor considered this. Play what's in your heart. Play what you would play if no one was listening, but you needed to sing anyway. Saturday arrived with perfect weather, warm but not hot, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of jasmine and orange blossoms. Eleanor spent the morning tidying the garden, even though it was already immaculate, fussing over details that no one else would notice. Susan and Patricia helped set up folding chairs borrowed from the community center. Harold strung lights, simple white bulbs on a cord, from the house to the orange tree, creating a canopy of gentle illumination. Maria arrived early with enough food to feed an army. As evening approached, neighbors began arriving. They came carrying dishes covered in aluminum foil, bringing extra chairs, greeting each other with the familiarity of people who'd shared a neighborhood for decades. There was an atmosphere of celebration, but also reverence, as if everyone understood they were part of something special. Barry arrived right at sunset, carrying just his acoustic guitar. He'd dressed simply, jeans and a button-down shirt, nothing fancy. When he walked into the garden and saw it transformed, saw the lights and the people and the warmth, his eyes welled up. Eleanor, he said, this is perfect. They ate first, a potluck feast spread across folding tables, everyone sampling everyone else's contributions, the garden filling with laughter and conversation. Barry met people he'd only seen in passing. Mr. Peterson, who'd lived on the street since 1963 and could remember when all this had been orange groves. The Ramirez family, whose son was studying music at the University of Miami. Old Mrs. Patterson, who'd taught piano lessons from her home for 40 years and had arthritis so bad she could barely play anymore. When the food was cleared and people had settled into their chairs, Eleanor stood up. Thank you all for coming, she said, her voice wavering slightly. When I moved to this street with my husband Thomas 55 years ago, we dreamed of building a community, of finding our place in the world. You've all been part of that dream. Wonderful neighbors and true friends. And now, incredibly, that community has expanded to include someone I never imagined I'd meet, let alone call a friend. She turned to Barry. Barry Gibb walked into my garden one day and heard me singing. He could have kept walking. He could have pretended not to notice. Instead, he stopped. He listened. He sang with me. And in doing so, he reminded me that life is full of beautiful surprises, that it's never too late for new friendships, that music connects us in ways that transcend everything else. There was applause, and Barry stood, guitar in hand. I don't have a prepared speech, he admitted, but I want to say that this garden, this friendship, these evenings have given me something I didn't know I was missing. Eleanor, you've taught me that real connection doesn't require stages or stadiums. It happens in quiet moments, in honest conversations, in the simple act of being present with another person. He settled into his chair, guitar across his knee. I'm going to play some songs tonight. Some you'll know, some might be new. I'm not performing for you, I'm sharing with you. There's a difference. He began with words, his fingers finding the familiar chords, his voice, still strong after all these years, filling the garden. The neighbors sat in rapt attention, some closing their eyes, some swaying gently. Eleanor, in her chair beside him, had tears streaming down her face. Between songs, Barry told stories. About writing "How Deep Is Your Love" with his brothers. About the early days when they could barely afford instruments. About the moment they realized their music was touching people in ways they'd never imagined. "Music is magic," he said, "but not the kind you see in movies. It's the magic of shared experience, of collective emotion, of strangers becoming connected through melody and lyric. Every time you sing along to a song, you're part of that magic." He played Massachusetts, and Mr. Peterson, who'd visited the state once in 1970, sang along in a wavering tenor. He played "To Love Somebody," and Harold got up and danced with his wife, both of them moving stiffly but joyfully. He played "Nights on Broadway," and the younger people clapped along, appreciating the disco beat even stripped down to just acoustic guitar. Then Barry paused. "This next one is new. I wrote it a few weeks ago, sitting in this very garden. Eleanor, this is for you and Thomas. It's called 'The Garden Remembers.'" The song was simple, beautiful, a meditation on love and loss, on gardens that outlive their gardeners, on memories planted like seeds that bloom year after year. The lyrics spoke of hands in soil, of roses that return each spring, of fountains that keep flowing even when the one who loved them is gone. By the time he finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the garden. "That's the thing about gardens," Barry said softly. "They're living memorials. Every flower, every tree, every carefully tended bed is an act of hope. Hope that beauty will persist, that growth will continue, that what we plant now will bloom for those who come after us." He played for almost 2 hours, taking requests, telling stories, creating an intimacy that none of them would forget. This wasn't Barry Gibb the superstar. This was Barry the musician, the storyteller, the friend. As the evening drew to a close and neighbors began to leave, each one stopped to thank him. Mrs. Patterson, the piano teacher, took his hand in both of hers. "I haven't heard music like that in years," she said. "Not technically perfect, though it was beautiful, but real. Music with soul. Thank you for reminding me why I fell in love with music in the first place." The Ramirez's son, the music student, looked starstruck. "I've studied your songs, analyzed them, but hearing them like this, seeing how you connect with the material, it's completely different from a recording." "Recordings capture a moment," Barry told him. "But live music is alive. It breathes with the room, responds to the audience, changes each time you play it. Never forget that." When everyone had gone and it was just Barry, Eleanor, and her daughters cleaning up, Susan said, "That was one of the most beautiful things I've ever witnessed." "It was special," Patricia agreed. She'd been skeptical about the whole thing, but even she had been moved. "Dad would have loved this." "Mom, he really would have." Eleanor nodded, unable to speak. She was exhausted, emotionally drained, but radiantly happy. After her daughters went inside, Barry and Eleanor sat in the garden one more time, surrounded by the evidence of the evening. Empty chairs waiting to be folded, lights still glowing overhead. The lingering warmth of community. "Thank you," Eleanor said finally, "for doing this, for being so generous with your gift." "Thank you for letting me share it," Barry said, "for reminding me that music isn't about how many people hear it, but about how deeply it's heard." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the neighborhood. Distant laughter, a dog barking, the rustle of palm fronds in the breeze. "You know what I realized tonight?" Eleanor said. "When you sang 'The Garden Remembers,' I felt Thomas here, really here, not just in memory. Your music brought him back to me, just for those few minutes. That's a gift I can never repay." "You don't need to repay it," Barry said. "You've given me something just as precious, a place to be myself without pretense or performance, a friendship that asks nothing except presence." As Barry walked home that night, he thought about the evening, about the faces of the neighbors, about the way music had created a sacred space in an ordinary garden. He thought about Eleanor's tears, Mrs. Patterson's gratitude, the young music student's awe. This, he thought, was what music was meant to do. Not to make people famous or rich, but to create moments of connection, to build bridges between hearts, to remind people they're not alone in their joy or their grief or their simple human need for beauty. He thought about writing more songs like "The Garden Remembers," Intimate, personal, specific. Songs that spoke to individual moments rather than trying to capture universal experiences. Songs that were small and perfect, like jewels rather than monuments. When he got home, he sat at his piano and began to play, the evening still resonating through him. The melody that emerged was gentle, contemplative, full of the warmth and light he'd felt in Eleanor's garden. He played until midnight, until the notes felt right, until the song was complete. Then he went to bed, grateful for gardens and friends, and the strange, beautiful way life sometimes brings exactly what you need, precisely when you need it most. Chapter 6. The Gift of Presence. The video appeared on YouTube 3 days after the garden concert. Someone, it turned out to be Mrs. Chen's granddaughter, acting with good intentions if poor judgment, had filmed the entire evening from a neighbor's window. The quality was grainy, the sound imperfect, but there it was. Barry Gibb playing an intimate concert in a garden in Coral Gables, performing for 20 neighbors like they were the only audience that mattered. The video went viral within hours. Millions of views, hundreds of thousands of shares, endless comments from people moved by the simplicity and authenticity of it all. Barry found out when his phone started ringing before sunrise. His manager was the first call, then his publicist, then journalists wanting comments, statements, interviews. "Did you know someone was filming?" his manager asked. "No," Barry said, "and it doesn't matter. What's done is done. We could have them take it down. Copyright claim, privacy violation." "No," Barry said firmly. "Leave it. If people want to see it, let them see it." Eleanor called a few minutes later, mortified. "Barry, I'm so sorry. Mrs. Chen's granddaughter meant well, but she should have asked permission. I had no idea. Eleanor, it's fine. Really, let people watch. Maybe it'll do some good. But this was supposed to be private, intimate. Now millions of strangers are watching what was meant for a few friends. The moment was still ours," Barry assured her. "The video is just a shadow of what we experienced. The real thing, that's still ours." The comments on the video were overwhelmingly positive. People were touched by the casualness of it all, by the way Barry interacted with the neighbors as equals, by the obvious love and respect between him and Eleanor. But a few comments stood out. "This is what music should be, shared, personal, human. I haven't cried listening to music in years. This brought me to tears. My grandmother just passed. She loved the Bee Gees. Watching this reminds me of sitting in her living room while she played their records. Thank you for this gift." Within a week, something unexpected happened. Other musicians started posting their own garden concerts. Small, intimate performances in backyards, living rooms, community centers. A movement emerged. Oman garden concerts. The idea was to return music to its roots, to strip away the commercial apparatus, and create authentic connections between artists and audiences. A famous country singer performed in a fan's barn. A classical pianist played in a nursing home. A hip-hop artist did a show in the community center where he'd first learned to rap. Each one cited Barry's garden concert as inspiration. "You started something," Eleanor told him one afternoon. They were in the garden, as always, watching this phenomenon unfold on Eleanor's iPad. "I didn't start anything," Barry protested. "I just played some songs for friends." Exactly, and that's revolutionary. In a world where everything is produced and packaged and marketed, you just showed up and played. You reminded people what music is supposed to be. Barry wasn't sure how he felt about being held up as some kind of example. He'd just done what felt right, what felt authentic, but he couldn't deny that something was shifting, both in the culture and in himself. Patricia called from Boston, excited. "Mom, have you seen the articles? They're calling you and Barry a model for how we should approach aging. There's a piece in The Atlantic about friendship in later life, and you two are the centerpiece." Eleanor rolled her eyes. "We're just friends. Why is that so fascinating to people?" "Because it's real," Patricia said. "Because in a world of fake everything, you two are genuine. People are hungry for that." Later that week, a letter arrived at Eleanor's house. It was from a woman in Oregon, handwritten in careful script. "Dear Mrs. Hartley and Mr. Gibb, I'm writing to thank you. I'm 79 years old, and when my husband died 5 years ago, I thought my life was essentially over. I stopped leaving the house much. I stopped seeing friends. I stopped doing the things I loved because they reminded me too much of what I'd lost. Then I saw the video of the garden concert. I saw you, Mrs. Hartley, sitting in your beautiful garden, your face filled with joy. I saw Mr. Gibb playing not for thousands, but for you and your neighbors, making music that clearly came from the heart, and something in me broke open. I realized I'd been waiting to die instead of choosing to live. The next day, I joined a book club I'd been avoiding. I called old friends I'd lost touch with. I started tending my garden again, really tending it, not just keeping it from becoming completely wild. Yesterday, a neighbor I barely knew stopped while I was planting bulbs and we talked for an hour. She'd lost her husband too. We're having coffee tomorrow. Thank you for showing me that life doesn't end when loss comes. Thank you for modeling friendship and joy and the simple act of showing up. You've given me my life back. With deep gratitude, Margaret. Eleanor read the letter 3 times, crying each time. When Barry visited that evening, she showed it to him. "This is what you did," she said. "This is the difference you made. We did it together." Barry corrected. "None of this happens if you're not sitting in your garden that day singing. None of this happens if you don't welcome a stranger into your space." Margaret, and all the people like her, they're responding to your courage as much as my music. Over the following weeks, more letters arrived. People shared stories of loss and recovery, of finding friendship in unexpected places, of learning to live fully in later years instead of merely surviving. The letters came from all over the world, in different languages, from people of all ages. A young musician wrote about being inspired to slow down and focus on intimate connections rather than chasing fame. A middle-aged woman described how she'd reconnected with her estranged mother after watching the video and realizing life was too short for grudges. A man in his 30s talked about calling his elderly neighbor to check on her, then ending up having coffee with her once a week. "We're accidentally making the world slightly better," Eleanor observed one day, surrounded by letters spread across her dining room table. "Is there any other way to make it better?" Barry asked. "Grand gestures, big initiatives, those are fine. But real change happens in small moments. One conversation, one song, one act of kindness that ripples outward." They decided to respond to some of the letters. Not all. There were too many. But they'd pick a few each week and write back. Barry would include a personalized note. Eleanor would share a bit of her story. It became part of their routine, reading letters together, crafting responses, feeling connected to this unexpected community that had formed around their friendship. One letter particularly moved them. It came from a hospice nurse in Seattle. "I play the video of your garden concert for my patients sometimes. Those in their final days especially. So many of them feel disconnected, isolated, like their lives no longer matter." Watching Barry perform for a small group of neighbors, seeing the love and respect in that space, it reminds them that life is measured in moments of connection, not years or achievements. Several patients have told me it helped them feel less afraid. "Thank you for that gift." Barry and Eleanor sat in silence after reading that one. "Music at the bedside," Barry said finally. "That's where it started for me, you know. My mother singing to us when we were sick. Rob and Maurice and me all crammed into one bed with the flu. Mom singing to make us feel better. That's the first music I remember mattering. Thomas sang to me the night before he died," Eleanor said quietly. "He could barely speak, but he hummed 'How Deep Is Your Love,' just the melody, no words. It was the last sound he made, the last thing he gave me." They sat in the garden as the sun set, both thinking about music and death and the way one can make the other bearable. "I want to do more concerts," Barry said suddenly. "Not big ones. Small ones like the garden concert. Hospices, nursing homes, community centers. Places where people might need to hear that they matter, that they're not forgotten." "Can I come with you?" Eleanor asked. "I don't sing well, but I could, I don't know, be there." "I'd like that," Barry said. "We could do it together. You could talk to people, share your story. I'll provide the music. Between us, maybe we can remind people that life is still worth living, even in its final chapters." Thus began a new phase of their friendship, a shared mission. Over the next 2 months, they visited 6 facilities around Miami. Small performances, never announced in advance, no media coverage. Just Barry and Eleanor showing up with a guitar and an open heart. At a hospice center in Miami Beach, Barry played for 15 patients and their families. Some were lucid, some weren't. Some sang along, some just listened. One elderly man, days from death, cried through the entire performance. His daughter told Eleanor afterward that he'd been a musician himself once, before Alzheimer's took his memories. He can't remember his own name, she said, but he remembered every word of those songs. At a nursing home in Homestead, Eleanor talked about Thomas, about grief, about learning to live with loss. The missing never goes away. She told them, you just get stronger at carrying it, and some days, you'll find that the love weighs more than the sorrow. After she spoke, a woman in her 90s approached her. I lost my husband 40 years ago. Everyone told me I'd move on, find someone new. I never did. And I felt guilty about that, like I was doing something wrong. But you made me realize I did move on, just not in the way they expected. I built a full life even with the empty space where he used to be. Thank you for saying that's okay. These visits took a toll on Barry and Eleanor both. The grief was heavy, the needs overwhelming. But they kept going because the letters kept coming, because people kept reaching out, because it mattered. I'm exhausted, Eleanor admitted one evening after a particularly difficult visit to a dementia ward. Me too, Barry said. But it's a good exhaustion, the kind that comes from doing something meaningful. Thomas used to say that. Eleanor remembered. He'd come home from a hard day of work and say, I'm good tired. This is good tired. They sat in the garden, not talking, just being present with each other and with the weight of what they'd witnessed. Do you ever worry, Eleanor asked, that we're taking on too much, that this is becoming bigger than we intended? Every day, Barry admitted. But then I think about Margaret in Oregon, about the hospice patients who find comfort in the music, about the nursing home residents who light up when we visit. How can we stop when it's making a difference? We can't, Eleanor said, but we need to be careful, to not lose ourselves in the mission, to remember that our friendship, this garden, these quiet evenings, that's the source. If we lose that, we lose everything. You're right, Barry said. We need balance. Maybe one visit per week, not 3. Maybe we say no to some requests. We can't save everyone, and we shouldn't try. But we can show up where we're called and trust that's enough. They agreed to set boundaries, to protect the space that had given rise to everything else. The garden remained sacred, a place for friendship, not philanthropy. The visits continued, but at a sustainable pace. And through it all, they kept writing letters, kept responding to the people who'd been touched by their story. Each response was personal, specific, real. They didn't offer platitudes or easy answers. They offered presence, understanding, the simple acknowledgement that they'd been seen and heard. This is what I'll remember about this time in my life, Eleanor said one evening. Not the fame or the attention, but the connections. The letters from people who felt less alone. The faces of the hospice patients when you played for them. The way we're all linked by music and loss and the courage to keep living. It's a good legacy, Barry said. It's our legacy, Eleanor corrected. Together. As twilight settled over the garden, they sat in comfortable silence. Two friends who'd found each other by chance and built something beautiful by choice. The world could watch, could comment, could try to understand. But the heart of it, the real magic, would always belong to them alone. Chapter 7. Full Circle. 6 months after that first chance encounter, Eleanor's garden had become something of a legend. Not because of the celebrities who visited, though occasionally other musicians would stop by, drawn by the story, but because of what it represented. A place where connection mattered more than fame, where presence trumped performance, where ordinary life was celebrated as extraordinary. Barry's visits had settled into a rhythm, Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, unless he was traveling. No longer surprising, just expected, like the roses blooming each spring or the fountain's steady splash. The neighbors had long since stopped treating his presence as noteworthy. Harold would wave from his tomato garden. Maria would bring over pastelitos without fanfare. Mrs. Chen would offer tea if she saw him arrive. It had become beautifully, wonderfully normal. On a Tuesday in late October, Barry arrived to find Eleanor agitated. She was pacing the garden, or trying to. Her arthritis made pacing more of a slow, deliberate walk, but the energy was clear. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately. "Patricia called. Susan, too. They've been talking and they think—" She stopped, looked at him. "They think I should sell the house, move into assisted living. They say I'm getting older, that it's not safe for me to be alone, that this place is too much for me to manage." Barry sat down carefully. What do you think? I think they're trying to take care of me, which I appreciate. But this is my home. Mine and Thomas's. We built a life here. The garden is his legacy. How can I leave it? What did you tell them? That I'd think about it, which I have been all morning. Thinking and thinking until I'm dizzy with it. She sat down heavily. Barry, I'm 83 years old. I can't garden like I used to. The house needs repairs I can't afford. My daughters are right about the practical aspects. But my heart, your heart wants to stay, Barry finished. My heart wants to stay, she confirmed. Is that foolish? Staying in a place that's becoming too much for me just because of sentiment? Barry considered this carefully. I don't think it's foolish to honor what matters to you. But I also don't think your daughters are wrong to worry. The question isn't really whether to stay or go. It's how to honor Thomas's legacy and keep yourself safe and healthy. Those don't have to be mutually exclusive. Eleanor looked at him. What do you mean? What if we found a way to keep the garden alive even if you needed to move? What if we made sure Thomas's legacy continued? How would that even work? Over the next few days, Barry made some calls. He consulted with landscape architects, with the city's parks department, with non-profit organizations. An idea took shape. The following Thursday, he arrived with Patricia and Susan, whom he'd contacted separately. Eleanor looked suspicious immediately. What's this about? Just hear us out, Patricia said. Please, Mom. Barry explained his idea. Eleanor would donate the garden to the city as a public memorial garden, dedicated to Thomas Hartley and all the love and care he'd put into it. The city would maintain it, keep it beautiful. It would be open to the public, a place for people to sit and reflect, to find peace, to remember their own loved ones. And here's the important part, Susan added. You'd have a lifetime right to visit whenever you want. It would still be yours, Mom, just shared with the community, like you and Thomas always wanted, a garden that brings people together. We could install a bench with Thomas's name on it, Barry said. Maybe a plaque about his life, about the love you built here. The garden would become a memorial, not just to him, but to the kind of love that creates beautiful things. Eleanor was crying. And where would I live? Patricia took her hand. There's a beautiful senior living community in Coral Gables. I've toured it. You'd have your own apartment, but there'd be help available if you needed it. Activities, community, safety. Susan and I would feel so much better knowing you were looked after. But I'd lose my independence, Eleanor said. You'd lose some privacy, Susan corrected. But you'd gain community, companionship, safety. Mom, you've spent your whole life taking care of others. Students, foster kids, neighbors. Let someone take care of you for a change. Eleanor looked around her garden, seeing it through new eyes. The roses Thomas had planted their first spring here. The fountain they'd installed for their 10th anniversary. The orange tree that had grown from a sapling to a generous provider of fruit. Could she really give it up? What about all my things? All our memories? You'd take what matters, Patricia said. Photos, Thomas's favorite chair, your books. The apartment's smaller, but it's yours. Barry spoke gently. Eleanor, I've known you for 6 months. In that time, I've watched you bring people together, create connections, build community. This garden has become a symbol of that. Imagine what it could mean to the neighborhood, to the city, if it became a public space dedicated to love and memory and community. That's Thomas's legacy. That's your legacy together. Eleanor sat in silence for a long time. Barry and her daughters waited, respecting her need to process. Finally, she spoke. If I do this, and I'm not saying I will, but if I do, I have conditions. The garden stays exactly as it is. No modernizing, no redesigning. Thomas chose every plant, planned every bed. It stays his vision. Agreed, Patricia said immediately. And I want to be consulted on the memorial plaque. I'll write it myself. Of course, Susan said. And Barry, Eleanor turned to him. You have to promise you'll still visit, Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. I don't care if I'm in a different location. Those are our times. I promise, Barry said, his voice thick with emotion. Those times are sacred. They'll continue no matter where you live. The transition took 2 months. Eleanor moved into the senior living community the week before Thanksgiving, her apartment on the 2nd floor with a balcony overlooking a courtyard garden. Not her garden, but still beautiful. Patricia and Susan flew in to help with the move. sorting through 55 years of accumulated life. The official transfer of the garden to the city happened on a sunny December morning. The mayor came, along with representatives from the Parks Department and the Historical Society. Neighbors gathered to witness the moment. Harold and Maria, Mrs. Chen and the Ramirezes, Mr. Peterson and Mrs. Patterson. People who'd known Thomas and Eleanor for decades. Barry was there too, standing beside Eleanor as she unveiled the memorial plaque. Thomas Hartley Memorial Garden. Dedicated to a man who believed gardens were meant to be shared, love was meant to be lived, and beauty was meant to bring people together. May all who enter here find peace, joy, and the courage to bloom. Established by his loving wife Eleanor, 2026. After the ceremony, people mingled in the garden. Barry overheard Harold telling someone, "Thomas would have loved this. He was always saying the neighborhood needed more green spaces, more places for people to gather. He'd be proud." Eleanor stood by the orange tree, one hand on its trunk, saying goodbye to something while also welcoming its new purpose. "You okay?" Barry asked quietly. "I'm good," Eleanor said, and she meant it. "This is right." Thomas would approve. The first Tuesday after Eleanor moved, Barry arrived at the senior living community promptly at 2 p.m. He signed in at the front desk, took the elevator to the second floor, found apartment 207. Eleanor opened the door before he could knock. "You came. I promised," Barry said simply. Her apartment was smaller than the house, but she'd made it home. Thomas's reading chair by the window, their wedding photo on the mantel, the shelf of Bee Gees albums rebuilt in a new space. But the best part was the balcony. Eleanor had filled it with potted plants, roses, herbs, a small orange tree, and a large planter. "I couldn't give up gardening entirely," she explained. "It's in my blood now." They sat on the balcony. Barry had brought a folding chair and talked like always. About music, about life, about the small observations that make existence interesting. Below them, other residents walked the grounds, sat in the courtyard, lived their lives in community. "It's different," Eleanor admitted, "but not bad different. I had coffee with 3 other residents this morning. One of them knew Thomas from the neighborhood association years ago. Another woman lost her husband recently, and we talked about grief. I'm making friends." "Good," Barry said. "You deserve friendship and community." "I have you," Eleanor said. "That's friendship enough. You can have both," Barry said. "Me on Tuesdays and Thursdays, new friends the rest of the week. That's a full life." Over the following months, a pattern emerged. The garden became a beloved neighborhood spot. People would stop there for lunch breaks, sit by the fountain, read under the orange tree. The city maintained it beautifully, honoring Thomas's vision, while allowing it to evolve naturally. Eleanor and Barry continued their Tuesday-Thursday routine, sometimes at her apartment, sometimes driving to the garden to sit in their old spots. Barry kept playing small concerts at hospices and nursing homes, sometimes at the senior living community where Eleanor now lived. Their mission continued, quietly changing lives. One Thursday in early spring, almost a year after their first meeting, they sat in the memorial garden on the bench dedicated to Thomas. It was perfect weather, warm but not hot, a gentle breeze, birds singing in the orange tree. "Do you remember when I was just an old woman singing alone in her garden?" Eleanor asked. "You were never just an old woman," Barry said. "You were someone keeping love alive through music. That's never small." "And now look at us," Eleanor said, gesturing around. "A memorial garden, a community of people we've touched, letters from strangers who say we've changed their lives. How did this happen?" "You sang," Barry said simply. "You sat in your garden and sang a song you loved, and the universe heard you." Everything else followed from that one honest moment. Eleanor took his hand. "Thank you for stopping. Thank you for listening. Thank you for staying. Thank you for letting me," Barry said, "for reminding me what matters, for showing me that the best music happens in small spaces with open hearts." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the fountain, watching neighbors pass by, existing in that perfect present moment that required no words. A young couple stopped to read the memorial plaque. The woman was pregnant, her hand resting on her belly. Her partner was reading the inscription aloud. "May all who enter here find peace, joy, and the courage to bloom." "That's beautiful," the woman said. "I hope our child grows up knowing places like this, places that remind you what matters." Eleanor and Barry exchanged a smile. This was Thomas's legacy, but it was also theirs. A reminder that love persists, that beauty matters, that music connects us across all the barriers we build. As the sun began to set, painting the Miami sky in shades of gold and coral, Barry picked up the guitar he'd brought with him. Without discussion, without planning, he began to play "How Deep Is Your Love." Eleanor sang along, her voice thin but true, exactly as it had been that first day. Her words rose into the evening air, carrying all the love and loss and hope she'd accumulated over 83 years of living. Other residents of the senior community, drawn by the music, came to the garden. They stood at a respectful distance, listening, some swaying gently, some crying, all touched by the simple beauty of two old friends sharing a song. When it ended, there was a moment of perfect silence. Then, spontaneously, applause. Not wild or performative, just genuine appreciation for something beautiful witnessed. Barry and Eleanor didn't bow or acknowledge it. They simply sat together, hand in hand, watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors, grateful for gardens and music, and the mystery of connection that makes life worth living. "Same time Tuesday?" Eleanor asked. "Same time Tuesday," Barry confirmed. And as the garden settled into twilight, as the fountain splashed and the orange tree rustled and life continued its ordinary, extraordinary course, two friends sat together in a place dedicated